Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the 10 o'clock session here. I'm Bill Quirk. I'm the Tools and Diagnostics Analyst for Piper Jaffray. And to my left, your right, is the President and CEO of Cancer Genetics, Panna Sharma. I'm going to hand the mic over here to Panna for a few introductory comments and maybe a brief overview of Cancer Genetics, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. So with that,
Great.
Panna.
Thanks, Bill. So Cancer Genetics is really aiming to be the oncology diagnostics partner from bench to bedside. We have a great global footprint. Our focus really is on developing new innovative tests that not only diagnose but help give insight into treatment and also the outcome for patient. And we do this both in blood-borne cancers and in solid tumors. Our unique focus is that we believe once you understand the unique and genetic makeup of each cancer, you can create targeted panels that are more cost-effective and give greater insight than just a pan-genomic approach. And our business model really is, we see a ton of compression between the biotech and pharma needs as well as the clinical community needs. So about half of our business is serving big biotech and big pharma. The other half is serving clinical cancer centers and clinicians and physicians. And we have CLIA labs throughout the United States and also in India and China.
Very good. Can you talk a little bit about the Response Genetics deal? Right, fairly recent, I'd argue transformative.
Yeah, it is. For us, we had a very strong and, let's say, very deep portfolio in blood-borne cancers. And blood-borne cancers, as everyone knows, has been on the forefront of really changing the paradigm of how we look and treat and manage cancer long-term. But the big market is in solid tumor. For every leukemia or lymphoma test, there's 5 or 6 or 7 tests done in solid tumors. And Response for us represented a way to get into that market quickly and transform what we think was a very undervalued asset at the time and really transform it. They also were doing the Alchemist trial for lung cancer with the NCI. They also had biotech and pharma clients that we did not have, and they had a presence on the West Coast where nearly 35% of genomic testing occurs. So in many ways, it gave us presence in terms of customer base, access to a portfolio, and also, very importantly, additional CLIA facility.
And now you have a JV with Mayo, right? And so how much or how little overlap does Response have with some of the products you had in development with Mayo Clinic?
That's a great question. So our focus with the Mayo Clinic, our joint venture, it's one of the few joint ventures that they've done, and it's focused in oncology and genomics. There, the goal really is to create the gold standard. So if you look at Response, what Response was doing was a lot of the clinically needed testing for lung cancer, for colorectal cancer, for melanomas, but they weren't developing new standards. And so OncoSpire really is to develop a new standard. Our first product is coming out, which will be in multiple myeloma. And to give you a flavor of what that does, in multiple myeloma, which nearly has 150,000 plus patients just in the U.S., recently 3 drugs have been approved. So the question is, which drug do you give? The question is your multiple myeloma going to progress rapidly or not? And then the third challenge clinically is, at different labs, as the tests are done, the results are not very concordant. And so the clinicians at Mayo wanted a test that could replace all the existing technology, cytogenetics, FISH, gene expression, give insight into what drugs could work better and how MGUS would transform into multiple myeloma. So we do all that on one test. And so that really, our goal there is to become the new gold standard in multiple myeloma testing. And so we'll be able to bring that out through the CGI enterprise to our clients and also to our biopharma customers. We'll be presenting 3 posters and presentations at ASH on the multiple myeloma test, and so we'll have a lot of really great data on that.
So now we combine solid tumor and heme products. Help us think a little bit about kind of what does that do for Cancer Genetics from a kind of a laboratory standpoint as well as from a biopharm partnership
That's
standpoint.
great. So one of the things that we like is that the marketplace is only becoming more competitive. The larger existing entrenched players like the LabCorps or the Quest, slowly beginning to wake up. They're transforming their own capabilities. At the same time, you have a lot of confusion with cancer centers and hospitals and clinics about which provider to use. And so the more capabilities you have, if you can provide them one neck to choke, as I like to call it, send us all of your challenging cancer cases, whether it be solid tumor, heme, leukemia, multiple myeloma, they like that approach. And so for us, it's opened up a lot of new hospitals and big centers. The second thing it's done for us is that we've been on a very focused program over the last 9, 12 months with Dr. Randy Goodman to focus on getting payer contracts. We now have over 50 million lives covered. We've been very focused on the Blue Cross Blue Shields. We also focus on Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim. We'll have a couple of national payers in the next few quarters. And again, they want depth of capability. So now that they can service their West Coast population, their East Coast population, and they can serve the full range of cancers, it becomes a much more compelling value proposition for them to enter into contracts with us. So those are two very important. And the third thing that we've seen, which you mentioned in the biopharma, is that a lot of the big pharma customers that we have, like the Roches and the Gileads and the AstraZenecas and Mercks, they don't just have programs in heme, or they just don't have a lung program. They have multiple programs, and so once you're a trusted provider, your ability to go in, whether it be with Gilead and say, okay, now we'd like a chance of doing some of your work in solid tumors, say pancreatic or lung, or you go to Celgene and say, we'd like a chance to do something now on the other side of your portfolio, it becomes very simple. And so we now have capabilities that, I think will basically, on the biopharma side, increase our total addressable market by about 3.5x, and on the clinical side by about 5x.
And we touched on a little bit on the competitive dynamic and the benefits of kind of having a one-stop shop, or in your terminology, kind of one neck to strangle. Help us think a little bit about, we just had the recent NeoGenomics Clarient deal, right? So your competitors are not standing pat here.
They're not. I think we're living in a very interesting time in our space. I mean, even forgetting that the fact that a lot of the multiples have been compressed and valuations have come down quite a bit. But at the same time, we're seeing, survival of some interesting companies. Consolidation is key to survival in this space. I think it's quite challenging to have just a one test and say you're going to be $1 billion company. I think those days are quite over. So I think, the moves that NeoGenomics has made, and I expect more moves like that in the industry. I think scale is going to matter, because don't forget, the key mission for any one of our companies isn't just create a great product. It's also you have to touch patient lives, and you have to get revenue, and you have to show all the other pieces. And so, to do all those things, you need a lot of smart people and a lot of capabilities. So I think, developing capabilities makes you more valuable for clinical care, and it makes you more valuable for biopharma. And so ultimately, that's what's going to drive shareholder value, is to have a great portfolio, but have a range of a portfolio, because not any one of these tests will win. Some will generate 5 million, some will generate 10, 20 million, some might generate 100 million over time. But technology shifts so rapidly. You've seen today, a test like in multiple myeloma, for example. When we launch the M3 profiler later this year and early next year, that's going to change the entire field of multiple myeloma. And so, and it's not going to stand still. I expect in 2 years we're going to have even better technology. And so I think the focus of our company is you have to innovate, but you have to execute. And so our key goal is, you have to marry innovation and execution. And so I expect companies that are well managed and decently capitalized to continue to look for scale.
Very good. Just thinking a little bit about the scale that you've achieved with Response, and kind of twisting that a little, right?
Yeah.
You identified some synergy targets, right?
Yeah.
Pre-closing of that deal. Now that you've closed it, had a chance to kind of really dig into the operations, how are you thinking about those synergy targets? Any update plus minus on that?
Yeah. So far we're kind of at the targets. I think because we've consolidated sales forces in the clinical side, we've been able to get about 30-40% cost reduction there. On the G&A side, we've gotten over 60% cost reduction on their side. We're going to aim for closer to 75. On the COGS side, we've been able to streamline COGS. So we're at our targets, if not slightly ahead. But again, the company also needs some investments to get to kind of the CGI level. And so we're going to, we're next year, as we kind of streamline, next year we're also going to invest in further automation and allow us to get to higher scale too.
Any lab consolidation with the two footprints?
There are some processes and workflows, but I think the labs are unique enough. Our focus in the West Coast now is to build the West Coast lab into a center of excellence for solid tumor. And the East Coast is going to singularly focus on heme. And so I think that also plays well because it allows the teams there to really focus in one category. And lung cancer we've seen has been, is I think in the next 5 years, between the knowledge we have about the cancer targets, the new drugs that are coming out, the fact that even the NCCN has updated guidelines, the fact that CMS is even reimbursing for certain panels, I think we are going to see a massive change in lung cancer care and lung cancer outcome. And one of the things that we started early in 2015, regardless of whether response happened or not, we wanted to get into lung. And so, OncoSpire, our JV with Mayo, has a lung panel, but we also were beginning to form our own organic lung efforts. So all that will be migrated now to Response, to that center. And so we'll be able to not only execute better, but we're also going to introduce some new innovative products that are going to be more market friendly.
Questions from the audience? No? Okay. Right now, the biopharm business is kind of outpacing the clinical side.
Yes.
So help us think about, I guess, kind of the longer term way to look at cancer genetics. Is this, a function of reimbursement on the clinical side? Kind of help us think about how to level set that over time.
Absolutely. So, Bill, I'm going to try to baseline a couple of data points for your audience.
Please.
So, we've grown our biopharma business quite rapidly. I think in 2012 it was nearly zero. It's now, first 9 months of this year, it's been, close to $9 million, almost $1 million a month, and growing. Our business on the biopharma side has been growing about close to 200% a year on average, and the clinical business about 25 to 30%. That is a function of reimbursement, longer cycle times, educating each physician. It's kind of you got to knock on each door, fortunately or unfortunately. And as you get scale, you can bring in whole systems, we're beginning to see that. But long term, post-response, our business will be about 40 to 45% clinical, and about 55 to 50% on the biopharma side. And I do expect the biopharma over the next 2 years to vastly outstrip the growth. It'll be a lot more lumpy too, because any one of these trials that starts could be $1 million, $2 million in one quarter, and it could go up or down. But if you look at our contracts that we've signed now over $35 million in contracts that we expect over the next few years. And that's growing. I think by the end of this year, the next month or two, it'll get closer to 40. And again, the biopharma business is growing so fast because the pharma companies, as you see at your own conference, want the data. They need to get these trials done rapidly. They need partners who have expertise. So that business, I think, the next year or two will continue to outstrip the growth of the clinical business.
Has the duration of those contracts changed at all, or would you anticipate it to change because of some of the additional capabilities that Response brings?
Yeah. So we're getting a lot more phase 3, big, large-scale global contracts. And those, I would say 2 years ago, we saw a lot of earlier stage, maybe phase 2, and the phase 3 contract that we got was really from, one or two really, really close partners, like the Gileads, who really understood and trusted our proprietary products. And now that's changing. Now we're routinely asked for phase 3 type work, which is great because that also gives us a very important element of our business is long-term is to have the companion diagnostic, or to be the unique lab that has the test only at its lab. And so now we have about 74 trials actively that we're managing across the enterprise. And in there, I expect about 5 to 7 of them have a CDX potential.
And companion diagnostics has been an interesting area.
Yeah.
Challenging in
Very
some regard,
yeah.
Particularly when you look at lab-developed test equivalents within the lab community. And so help us think about kind of how you would expect to capitalize on some of those you noted, the phase 3 relationships. You want to be the companion diagnostic. How do you increase the stickiness with the drug?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that are going on, and some of them have to do with what we've done at CGI, and a lot of it also has to do with what's going on in the industry. I think a lot of you probably saw a week and a half ago the big publication by the CMS and FDA on companion diagnostics, and they had 20 case studies in the back. I mean, it was actually, I always like to beat up on over-regulation of our industry, and we should allow free markets to be free, but I think in this case they have actually laid out a very good case on why the FDA needs to have tighter control over certain tests, especially high-risk tests. And companion diagnostics would fall into those because those are the ones that you're going to make or break decisions about a person's outcome and a person's right to have a certain drug. So I think that's going to be a positive. It'll wipe out over the next 2 to 3 years a lot of the Me Too LDT equivalents to CDX. And I think that's a positive because in their case studies, they very clearly laid out where they showed the CDX and the LDT data points are not the same. And so I think this will be positive for patients, and then I think it'll be positive for investors because they'll clearly be able to say, okay, because you have the CDX, you're going to gain the majority of share, whereas today it's hard to do that, to your point.
That's a great segue, Panna, to my next series of questions here. Thank you. And that is on FDA regulation. I think we're going to be very close here based on a number of different diligence points, including an FDA workshop, all of couple of weeks ago now. So it looks like it's probably end of year, early 2016. How are you guys thinking about that?
Early 2016, yeah.
And what sort of work internally do you think you're going to have to provide? And if you want to go further, how do you think? Do you think you're going to be in the high risk test category for the most part?
It'll depend on which test. So we already have an FDA cleared test, the tissue of origin that we acquired, and so I think we're quite comfortable with the governance that goes around having a quality regulatory infrastructure. We also have a CE cleared product for our cervical cancer test. So I think we're on the right side of having the right regulatory and quality infrastructure. At the tail end of acquiring the acquisition we did last year, and then response this year, we've rolled out a new QMS across the company to basically manage and regulate every SOP, every test, have the outcomes for how they're performed, et cetera. So the tracking and infrastructure that we have, I would say, is by and far much higher than most CLIA-oriented companies. So I think we're ready for that. Our tests, some will be, yes, make or break, kind of high risk. A lot, though, will be prognostic because they're giving outcome information, which is, again, lower risk. And I think the FDA is suggesting kind of 3 classes or maybe 4 classes of risk. So I think we'll be across the spectrum. I don't think there's any one that'll. And again, remember, many of our tests not only give diagnostic information, but they're also giving therapeutic insight or prognostic. So we might have to narrow the claims for some of those tests, or make clear the claim for this one is for this only. So I think it'll help sharpen the utility of our tests.
And you mentioned a moment ago about the opportunity that actually regulation of LDTs may provide. And so can you elaborate a little bit on that? How much incremental market share over a 3 to 5 year kind of post-regulated world do you think is available for CGIX?
So I think we're, infrastructure-wise, we're on the right side of the regulatory. I think 16 and 17, I think it'll start wiping out a lot of the mom-and-pop oriented companies that cannot keep up, or their business model has heavily relied on creating the Me Too and just being faster. I think the fast follower labs out there will be quite challenged. So it'll give opportunity for us to take that share. It'll give opportunity for other, well-managed, decently capitalized companies like Neo or others to take share as well. So I think the element for further consolidations is happening.
Does it help improve the reimbursement picture? Right.
I think, I wish I could say there's a one-to-one link between, FDA's suggestions and reimbursement outcomes, and as we know, there's not. And in fact, it's almost like the opposite. It's almost a -1 every time the FDA in the diagnostic world has approved a diagnostic test. That test is done miserably. So it's almost like it's a funny case study, and you know that on your own. Whether you look at Agendia versus Genomic Health, you look at the tissue of origin that we just adopted by Pathwork versus some of the other tissue of origin tests. You look at the prostate tests that have been FDA cleared versus the LDTs. So I don't think it's going to make the reimbursement any easier. I think unfortunately reimbursement, the positive thing we have in reimbursement is that what we're seeing now is among drug companies, AstraZeneca is doing this, Pfizer is beginning to do this, I see a number of others looking at it, is that they realize that unless the test is done in the way and to their specification that they need, they're not going to get those patients onto their drugs. And so we've seen, in a number of, big pharma, large biotech, who aren't getting the number of patients for their drugs, and a lot of that they go back and say, how can we get more patients tested? And so now they're pushing reimbursement on those tests with payers. That'll help us. And more importantly, at the same time, we're seeing ACOs, accountable care organizations, saying, look, all of our clinicians or patients are saying we need test XYZ. They're going to the internet, and so they're, why are we not offering it? And so they're getting their head out of the sand, and they're saying, okay, well, we'll offer it, but here's kind of how we look at it. Here's how we look at the price. And, we have a pretty big range, and that's unfortunate. We have, some plans that pay us, thousands of dollars for a test, and we think that's, probably fair value. And we have some that only pay us $300 or $400 because that's all they want to pay for anything. And so I think once we get out of that environment, and that's going to last for another year or two, I think it'll be clearer for investors. And the only way to drive that is through more accountable care groups and more working groups to look at what is the value of these tests. And that's why, my belief is that the disease-focused model is going to win long-term because ACOs care about disease, right? They don't care about, am I looking at 50 or 300 or 500 genes? All they care about is the outcome. Right. And so that's been our focus all along, is let's look at, not number of genes, because 290 genes might not tell you more than the right 19 gene test if you're looking at the right portions of those genes. And so I think the disease-focused approach allows you to put actual patient numbers, patient dollars, and outcomes. And so I think that approach will bode well for us, and I think we'll be on the right side of that ACO equation.
Very good. With that, I'm afraid we're out of time. Panna, good luck with the response transaction.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you.